We are thrilled today to have Kirsten and Greg with us. Kirsten Ellenbogen, President and CEO of the Great Lakes Science Center since 2013, a scientist and an educator of all generations from early childhood to adult. Some of her tweets which describe her passions: let's change what counts about learning. This is not a time to be quiet. And she is a self-proclaimed STEM education advocate. She came to us from the Science Museum of Minnesota and found her original roots back here in Cleveland, originally from Detroit, but her family was here in Cleveland, so she made many trips and has immersed herself in her new home, serving on, this is a long list, the Planning and Urban Design Commission, the Lakefront Advisory Group, Downtown, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the Association of Science and Technology Centers, Cleveland Water Alliance, and she was recently appointed to a committee of the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. She's been recognized by Crain's as a notable woman in STEM. A signature piece of hers is that she launched the Cleveland Create Zone, and I want you to know that when she chose to come to Cleveland from the Science Museum of Minnesota, she rejected San Diego and chose Cleveland. A proud member of the Leadership Cleveland class of 2014. Greg Harris became president and CEO of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2012. He had served as a part of their team for 4 years prior to that. And before that, he spent 14 years at the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum in Cooperstown, New York. He sees both institutions as emblematic collections of our culture. You might say, how did he transition from baseball to music? Well, his love for music has deep roots. You probably all know that he founded the Philadelphia Record Exchange, a tiny retail store in Philadelphia in the early 80s that specialized in rare and independent records. Cashed in on that, and with a resume boasting guitarist for a garage band, was able to land himself a career as a road manager for a touring group. He reportedly lived on $5 a day, slept on couches, and somewhere along the way restored a '57 Chevy. During those road tours in Baltimore, he managed to convince the groundskeeper of the Orioles ballpark to turn on the lights at night and let the band run the bases. So we know that he is a determined and tenacious individual. He believes that the Rock Hall, as well as the Baseball Hall of Fame, are there to preserve history, to honor excellence, and to connect generations. And he is a proud member of the Leadership Cleveland class of 2010. Kirsten and Greg, we welcome you, and I'll turn it over to you for your words of inspiration.
This is Greg, and I'm going to go first with just providing a couple-minute overview of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and sort of some leadership during this moment in time. And then Kirsten will do the same, and then we'll have a dialogue together and then take some questions. I see all the names that are participating. What a great turnout, what a great crowd. Really honored to be invited to do this with the Cleveland Leadership Institute, and thrilled that you mentioned, of course, the greatest class ever, the class of 2010. I have to say something that may be surprising as my leadoff, and that is the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. When we closed our doors on March 14th to the public, we had started our year on an amazing run, the best January in history, the best February in our history, and then things ground down and our world changed and we closed on March 14th. But I can tell you that when we reopened our doors on June 14th, we were a better, stronger organization than we were when we closed. And as we sit here in July, we are a better, stronger organization than we were on June 14th. So it's a continued evolution, it's continued change, and we managed through this moment in time. And really what guided us and still guides us today was when we closed down, we all look back and think about those moments, we were wondering, are we closing for a week, 2 weeks, a month. God forbid, are we closed until July? Are we closed until August? But we closed, and what we decided was we weren't going to go into hibernation mode or survival mode. We cast sort of 4 strategic priorities that guided everything we did. First and foremost was the sustainability of our enterprise. How do we preserve the enterprise to make sure that it's going to be stable and strong for the future? That was number 1. Number 2 was to maximize digital. We knew that virtual that was the way to go, and just to double down and really go hard on resources, on energy, on time, and on projects to get things done digitally. The third was to maximize this moment in time where certain staff that are usually very busy suddenly had free time. Certain opportunities were there. And this was a moment to not think about all the groups that we lost for group sales and for group rentals and other things, but instead, what could we deliver to other places? And how could we do that with partners and be a great partner? And then the final tenet was to make sure that we had a strong team, to make sure that our staff, those that we all locked arms with to accomplish those first goals, were going to be with us, and they were going to be satisfied and happy and challenged and driven. And then we jumped in, and we had some rough times where we had to make a decision after the first month of closure that we were going to furlough 2/3 of our staff. And then we took the third that remained and said, we are the fortunate few that are still here. You all know the speech. We trotted that out, but we shared with them that we have this moment, this opportunity where we can focus and we can deliver. And we did all that with a lens of being closed for the next 10 weeks. And we said, what can we get done in 10 weeks that we can all look back on it and know that this time was spent valuably and that it improved the enterprise. And that was the spirit we had going into this, and the spirit that still carries us today. That's our place. I'm speaking as an entity. Then there's the broader peer group entity that Kirsten and I will talk about. We always had great relationships with the other museums in the region and with each other, the CEOs. But this time around, we immediately went to weekly calls, sharing information, collaboration, acting as a full industry as opposed to independent entities. And there was a lot of strength in that. We'll talk about that a bit more later. But that's the general overview from our place. I believe we're a stronger organization today than we were when we closed, and we accomplished some remarkable things. When we talk about focusing on digital, we can proudly say that we had 15 million YouTube views in the month of April, that our educational content used to be used by about 50 teachers a day. It's now used by 500 teachers a day, and so on and so on. So we're open now. We're servicing the public, and we're in a better shape now than when we closed. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my neighbor, my friend, and colleague in all of this, Kirsten Ellenbogen. Kirsten?
Thanks, Greg. So our story in some ways is similar to Greg's, but let me take you through some of the things that guided our decision-making as we were looking towards closing. And I have to begin that by saying we were guided in part by our international colleagues. It was such a huge help to be in communication with and hear from international colleagues who were shutting down their museums. January, February, I was attending meetings in February that should have had international colleagues, and they stayed home because they were working on the plan to shut down their museums in Poland and France and other countries. And that was a big wake-up call for us. And it was something that allowed us to get prepared in a way that was a real advantage for us. So with a little time to think about what would it look like if we had to close our facility, we started looking to say, what would our priorities be? And in thinking about our priorities for closure, we looked at 3 areas. First, and this will come to no surprise to anyone who works with cultural institutions, we look to our mission, vision, and guiding principles. And that was a big part of just stepping back and asking ourselves, okay, who should we be while our building is closed? This is something that many museums have faced in natural disasters, but this is a rare occasion where essentially all museums worldwide have faced the question of what are we without our building? And your mission, vision, and guiding principles are something that really directs that. Second thing we looked at was a rough gap analysis. We didn't do the big formal kind of gap analysis that we've been able to do for prior projects. But it was important to take a step back and look around at the community and say, who's going to be providing what? Because so much of the world moved to digital, it was a very different kind of gap analysis to say, oh, well, wait a minute, even if this is what's happening in our community, let's look broader at what's happening internationally, because the resources that our community is using in a digital world suddenly look very different from the way we'd offer resources when we're providing work. It's a different kind of gap analysis for us. The third thing is to look at pressing community needs. So those needs bubbled up very quickly. Everything from families saying, how are we going to get through schooling? How are we going to get through our days? The days just look different right now. To Cleveland, Cuyahoga County, and our state stepping up and setting some of the priorities. So when Cleveland looked to health disparities in our community and looked at the role of systemic racism and health disparities, that sends a big signal to a STEM education organization in the community. So those three areas, that mission, vision, guiding principles, that gap analysis, and the pressing community needs, really established where we were able to hone in. We did have a little bit of time to prepare, and it meant that, for example, when we closed our doors, really before we finished business on the day of March 12th, we then, on March 13th, were able to launch our digital programming in Curiosity Corner Live. And that's because we were able to spend time sending materials, sending resources home with staff so that they were already set up at home to know that when we got to that closure moment, we'd be able to launch our digital materials the next day. Those sorts of things have certainly been helpful. And if you look on our website and see the kind of programming we've done, that's been very consistent in looking at, where are those needs, right? So, and how can we take programs that were very actively used when we were able to provide them face-to-face and convert them quickly. So for example, we've got a big homeschool presence, converting that and being able to say, hey, we're going to finish out the year with you and we're going to do it virtually. That was a big piece of it. We looked ahead at our summer camp program. We do a day camp program. It's a big part of what we do in the community. There's a lot of scholarship participants in that program. Really stepping back and saying, what does it take to do this program in a new format? It was an extraordinary period of time. It continues to be an extraordinary period of time to recognize the creativity, the ability of our staff to experiment with solutions, and our ability to be agile and say, we're going to try this and we're going to make changes continually. I'll close by saying the big part of what's guided our work has been looking at safety and the science of what we can do. That always guides our work. I mean, I make light of it often. If you see me out in the community doing talks before the pandemic, I would often say, look, when we look as an organization at our guiding principles, as the way we operate on a day-to-day basis, safety is number one, because we're an organization that we blow stuff up pretty much every day as part of the programming we're doing with the public. In an organization where we do that, it was very natural for us to shift that conversation and say, how do we reopen and do our programs safely? And that's why we, for example, have been able to do our summer day camp in a very different format from how we've done it before. But we've been doing that from June 1st and able to operate safely by putting those same principles that allow us to say, hey, we're going to have a big crowded room full of people before the pandemic. we're going to do an explosion live in front of them and we're going to do it safely. Those same principles then applied to say, how do we take an evolving science about a virus, take a much loved and very important summer day camp program and convert that into something that's still safe and usable in the community. So that's been what's been guiding our conversation. But let me turn it back to Greg now, because I know we wanted to talk about the value of the shared conversation that we've been having among our colleagues in the community.
Thank you. Yeah, that's the shared conversation. I think that I love the way Kirsten characterized that thinking that actually really related to the mission, vision, and goals of who they are all the time. And each organization was doing that to different degrees, but then there was this commonality of coming together. And if we think about one of the great strengths of this last 3 or 4 months was just how it bolstered these partnerships that may have been there before, but really became vital in this moment. And the one that we're all part of many different organizations, whether as volunteers or as peer groups and others, but we have a peer group of all the museum CEOs and attraction executive directors in the region. And we would meet quarterly in the past. We immediately went to weekly calls, and the topics were changing every week or two based on, all right, are people rushing with their PPP money? Are people going to require masks when we reopen? What are you hearing from DeWine? And we all sort of just shared information and came together as a body to be far more efficient. And then we were doing the same on a national level with our peer organizations. Those relationships were built and strengthened during this moment, and they're going to carry all of our businesses forward in the future and make it stronger. So, it's become the ability to share information. And I'll share one small example. When we if you come to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame today, or the Science Center or other places, or go to our website, the guidelines for how we're providing a clean, safe environment at the museum were informed by the Clean Cleveland initiative from Destination Cleveland, but also all the other peer museums. We all came together, even though masks were not required statewide. We all pledged that we'd require them on our premises. We'd require health screenings before entry. And we layered on about 7 or 8 protocols, actually about a dozen protocols. And at the bottom of those guidelines are the logos of all of our institutions, because kind of like signing that declaration, we are all in, we are all here, and we want you to know when you enter the Natural History Museum, or you enter the Cleveland Museum of Art, you enter the Great Lakes Science Center, we're all in this together, and there's a strength in that. Kirsten, is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, exactly. And if you go to any of our websites, you'll see that shared graphic pop up. It says, here, I'll hold it up for the few of you who can see that. The know before you go graphic, right, is something we created among the group. It's been interesting in some of the National Museum conversations, the surprise that among that large of a group of museums, we were able to create a shared piece. And I'll say it only happened because we already had a quarterly get together. We already had a habit of, a shared email list where we could fire off a quick email to say, hey, does anyone have a policy on this, or how are other people responding to this? So there was some trust before the pandemic started. And let me tell you, there's nothing to solidify a community like a stressful situation. And so coming together weekly through the pandemic has been critical in allowing us to say, okay, let's go ahead and be better at telling the community, here's what to expect consistently across our organizations. And I think you'll be able to see more of that in the future. We are having conversations now about what kind of shared communication, what kinds of shared expectations that we'll be putting forward in the future. And that's something I really value. I honestly have not had that in other cities where I've lived and worked before it among the museums. There have been great opportunities for terrific conversations, but the expectation that we would work together and have some shared norms is pretty special among Cleveland, and I've really come to appreciate that. I would add the other thing on this is really being able, I think what you're going to see among the museums is an opportunity to think about some of the hardest conversations we're having right now. So for example, conversations around race, equity, inclusion, to be able to have the very hardest conversations among a trusted peer group and push out from that to say, how do we make sure we do better? Again, it's just a rare and extremely valuable thing. And the community is the one who benefits. We benefit as leaders, but long-term, what you'll see is a community benefit from that.
Very well said. To amplify it, the graphic is a graphic piece, but the unity behind it permeates so many other parts of what we all do. And it's also a model. We're doing this as leaders, as the CEOs, but our staff are doing it too, because they see that we aren't really holding back and that we're open and we're not competing. We're all in this together, and we're finding ways to succeed together. So it's more than just a graphic. And our latest is, and again, every 2 weeks this has been changing. Our latest now is, are we going to close again? If it escalates to, last Thursday, we thought we might move into that level 4 purple zone using the state standards. And if it went there, we agreed as a body that that's where we would go, even though if it wasn't mandated by the state. Again, just another small example of this in practice, but it's been really valuable.
So I know we're getting towards 12:30 when we'll take everybody's questions. Greg and I had agreed that we'd wrap up this portion of the meeting with just a few words of advice we would give, lessons learned. And Greg, I know we want to make sure you still have a strong connection, so I don't know if you want to start that and then I'll go.
I was hoping you would go first.
All right, I'll take the dive in. So, lessons learned. I would say the number one lesson is it is not possible to communicate too much. We thought we were doing a great job of communicating. We might have paused and patted ourselves on the back a little too soon because what we started to hear from staff, and again, at Great Lakes Science Center, we've got 45 full-time staff, around 47 part-time staff. We thought among a group of that size where we would have typically pre-pandemic monthly face-to-face all-staff meeting. There's a daily check-in to say, here's what's happening today, here's how we did yesterday. That's sent out over an all-staff email, in addition to the typical project and department meetings that you would have. So we thought we had pretty good communication coming into this, but we increased it and said, okay, let's increase the frequency of the all staff meetings and let's work on just having a resource that people can turn to on a regular basis. So let's start an email newsletter that goes out to staff. We call it the water cooler because it's meant to kind of replace that chit chat that you would have on a daily basis when we're all face to face. And we put that out really meaning it to be as much of a share photos from what it looks like to work at home for you, what are the pets who are sitting on your keyboard, that kind of material, as well as the resources, the reminder about, hey, we have the employee assistance program. Here's some of the latest research on the novel coronavirus that we're reading, those sorts of things. So sharing those resources. We quickly learned that we were not doing enough. We increased that to weekly all staff meetings. The the newsletter is going out twice a week. And now we have a drop-in lunch 3 times a week. And that really was because we have too many staff who are just still not feeling like, hey, I've got a place to go and be with my colleagues again, even if I'm not face-to-face with them. And let me tell you, you may be coming into Great Lakes Science Center to work, but that doesn't mean that you're still getting, we are still restricting meetings. We are still restricting the amount of time people can spend in conversation face-to-face, even with masks on. And so that limits the culture that we've spent a lot of time building. So, increased communication cannot replace culture, but my advice would be, if you think you're communicating enough, go back and communicate more. That's something that we found that is vital to get through this stressful period. So I'll turn it over to Greg.
That's terrific. Thank you. I love hearing that and could not agree more on the communication side. I'll share some of the lessons learned for us is that this digital virtual office can work really well with the right communication, the frequency. I feel that our team is actually closer together now, and some of it's due to it being a lean team, so that everybody really has to be present and active, and that tends to drift when you're open 7 days a week, 365 days a year. But we're lean. I think we're closer now than we ever were, and the digital remote piece of it really works for what we do. So, for instance, we're planning a renovation now on that green space between the Rock Hall and the Science Center. The original plan called for 20,000 square feet of office space. I can't see us building 20,000 square feet of office space. I think we're going to find a good way to balance being on site and working from home in the future that will take lessons learned from this moment in time and carry them forward. So that's one thing that we've learned. The other is this ability to be nimble and pivot. Have your path, have your plan, but within that plan, when you see opportunities, the goal isn't just to put together a good plan. The goal is to have a plan that you can then move and you can take advantage of those opportunities, because they've been changing week to week, the opportunities, the challenges, and then reinforcing to the team. We're so forward focused that we rarely look backwards. So one of the key lessons is to look backwards appropriately to share with the team the successes. And what that does is builds a resilience and builds a confidence in doing even more in the future. But that does get lost when you're going fast. And to be able to pause and celebrate that, that's what we're doing weekly town halls with our staff. We're doing weekly Zoom happy hours with our staff. And those are the times to celebrate those moments. So I think those are lessons learned within our organization. And then the lessons learned in the wider org is, again, these peer groups are vital to have folks. We both have our board chairs on this call. We love the board. The board is critical. It's also nice to have the door shut, or even the virtual door shut, with some other folks that are doing the same thing and just sharing in detail and finding ways to help each other. All of that, I think, is one of the things that we learned. The other thing we learned is sometimes it doesn't need to be too complex. We saw a need early on when the Cleveland food banks and other places were out distributing food, and also the healthcare shifts were changing. We had a van that was branded with the Rock Hall's logo, and we outfitted it with a great sound system. We dubbed it the Joy Ride, and we tasked one of our great dynamic employees with bringing joy to communities that needed a boost. And we put it out in the press, and immediately it was booked solid to roll up to food collection points, to roll up to shift changes, to go to graduation parties and blast great rock and roll at a time when all of us were sort of isolated from each other, and we could bring that joy to those communities. That was not a heavy lift. The impact was huge, and it isn't always the biggest most expensive investment you make that can have the greatest impact. Those are some lessons learned. Happy to take some questions, and I think we still have a little bit of time. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Kirsten. This has been a master's class in leadership and nimble leadership. So really appreciate you sharing. We have a lot of questions coming in, so we're going to get straight to it. It's been amazing to hear a lot of the digital offerings that you've had, and you know, Greg, obviously you're tracking those metrics. Kirsten, I'm sure the Science Center is as well, and seeing those increases. But as you have shifted back to allowing people to come into your spaces, how has that been going? Are individuals respecting the guidelines? Has there, you know, is there an enthusiastic response in terms of being able to return? And do you see any trends moving forward as the situation ebbs and flows?
Yeah, I'll go first and talk about our visitors through the door. And I hope there's a little room. Kirsten, you should talk more about your camps, because it's incredible what you pulled off with that. But on our visitors, you know, we've been open for over a month. We opened with a free day for healthcare providers and their families, and then we went to paid ticketing. We did not discount. It's a full price ticket. There are protocols. You must wear a mask in the museum. You must have your health screening. Most of our 150,000 square foot building is open, but there's a theater or two that are not. We have not had pushback from folks. There's been, you know, one or two instances where people may not have wanted to wear the mask for a variety of reasons, but we're sitting at roughly 20% of what our typical attendance would be at this time of year. So what that means in our world is we're getting 500 to 600 people per day when we normally would be getting 3,000 people a day or even 4,000 people a day. But we're thrilled to have 500 or 600 a day. They're having a great experience. And we've really created an efficient entry system that will always be with us moving forward. It's a digital ticket on your phone. It's a quick scan and you're in. Everything's in advance and you have a time slot. So that's our place, and we're open. And we're also offering live music on Thursday nights and Saturday nights, socially distanced on our plaza, and some other community events like yoga on Tuesday nights, doing it all safely and carefully. Kirsten, back to you.
So part of the benefit of having our conversations among the Cleveland Museum directors has been to agree well in advance of some of the state and county level conversations about masks that was a priority for our organizations. So I will say one of the greatest worries going into reopening our building among staff was to make sure that we had ways of feeling supported and that we had training to deal with any conflict resolution that might be needed around a conversation around a mask. I'm very happy to say, like Greg, that has really been a minimal to non-existent issue. We're spending far more time just reminding people to pull the mask up over their nose than we are in dealing with someone who is unwilling to wear a mask or any alternative that we provide for them. So that's been wonderful. And I would say a shining example of that has been among our campers, right? So we do offer a day camp program. It is greatly reduced. Our attendance is, like Greg said, we have a similar number, around 20% of what it would be typically this time of year. Our camps, we had to go to greatly reduced numbers, but we also maximize space. You know, many of you know that we have a school on site, our Cleveland Metro School, MC Squared STEM, working with them in a great partnership to make sure we can use some of that space while they're not using it, as well as spreading it across parts of the building that we normally would not be in, so that we can keep our camps at 6 to 8 children per group. We've integrated in digital instruction with face-to-face instruction. So typically when you would have had a group of 20 campers, an instructor who is usually a certified teacher in front of the group working with them on the experiments they're doing, and then counselors around the room who are facilitating and supporting. Instead, in order to facilitate all of this, keep our group size small and make a model that works, that lead teacher is instructing virtually, and they're instructing both our at-home campers and our on-site campers. And then you've got the facilitator still working face-to-face. And this goes to one of the questions about, can you really do everything digitally, or there's some things that still need to be face-to-face? Even in our at-home program, what we've found is we need to supplement that with a hotline, so that if a camper is at home having trouble getting through a complex experiment, we've got a dedicated hotline so that they're calling in and working one-on-one with someone that facilitates that learning. And we're really taking that model into our partnership with schools and in our community work for the fall, to make sure that we figure out that intersection of face-to-face that's still safe, and that digital learning. I will say the other piece to your question, Bob, one of the first things we also relaunched in face-to-face engagement was our partnership with our Cleveland recreation centers. And in the city of Cleveland, they are neighborhood resource and recreation centers. Our staff who work in our rec centers are trained around trauma-based education and understanding how to support youth in Cleveland, around, working through trauma situations, being well supported to learn through those situations. And there are unfortunately many instances where our Cleveland youth are working through that, but certainly this is another one of those situations. Cleveland Rec Centers really worked hard to be able to reopen safely. They asked us to continue our partnership and be there as they reopened. And for us, from a mission and community serving standpoint, that had to be a priority.
Thank you. You've both referenced some, digital shifts or enhancing some of the digital offerings that you've had. What if things were cleared and open tomorrow and life was back to how we knew it pre-COVID? What that you've changed would you anticipate becoming permanent as a part of how you operate now? And then, maybe a secondary question along with that is, what is just a hard change to make from that's, sort of a necessary element of in-person interactions that would be nice to get back to?
The things that we've learned, for instance, digital ticketing, we went from roughly 17% of our ticket sales were digital in advance to right now 99.9% of them are digital in advance, and that's going to stay. We did it to comply with Governor DeWine's concept of having a timed slot as well as an advance purchase, so that you're not doing cash exchanges. That's one thing for sure that's staying with us. The other, in the big picture, the changes we made to make our content accessible to educators, to fans, and to others through digital platforms, our website, our educational content for teachers, all of that, that's all staying. In fact, we've now built such a great base that will be a foundational piece for us going forward. That's all staying for sure, and it has been a great sort of step forward. Things that we regret, for the first week, we didn't have our immersive theater open because we wanted to see how it went and if we could do it safely. We found a way to do it safely, which was really something that we could deliver on. I do feel like our concerts that we're doing, they are intended to attract, moderate audiences, and it's going to be a long road, a real long road. But I look forward to the day far off in the future when we can have much larger crowds experiencing their connectedness and joy of rock and roll together. But that's a long way off. We're gonna take what we can and do what we can safely do now. One of the interesting things when we started our live music series again, with July 1st being our first date, was we had performers come in. They told us they have not played for a live audience since February. And it was as fulfilling for the performers to actually have that feedback from an audience than it was for the audience members to hear it and be together sharing something like this. So those are a few things. And Kirsten, is your theater open?
We did open the theater. I mean, we spent a lot of time looking at our HVAC systems as part of our reopening plan. As we know, that's critical. We happen to have one that's well suited for this situation. And as you know, in dealing with projectors, and a lot of projectors as we use in our Cleveland Clinic Dome Theater, that is in fact our area, particularly because we just did a renovation a few years ago. It's our area with our very, very best HVAC and circulation of air to get fresh air in there. So the combination of the superior HVAC system, as well as the ability, you know, with almost 300 seats in that space, we can really stagger seating. So as much as if you had asked me 3 months ago, were you going to reopen the theater? My answer would have been no. When we really looked at the detail, we saw that there was a good way to reopen it. And in fact, people are buying tickets for it daily. So there's a demand for it. Like you, I mean, getting to Bob's question, I completely agree. Things like the digital ticketing are wonderful. We're excited about keeping that. And I know Kate Steiner had a question on here related to this about what kinds of digital programming might be permanent. For us, I think one of the interesting things is the intersection where we have shifted how we do some in-person engagement and added digital to reduce the number of people in the room. That model, I think, is here to stay, not just in how we're partnering with Cleveland schools and other regional school districts, but also in perhaps how we do some of our programming in the future to realize that we can enhance the experience, bring in some expertise that's digital, but still provide the facilitation to keep that curiosity and experimentation going in a way that requires a little more than in-person support. So I'm most excited about the hybrid model for the future.
Well, and that's a great, oh, sorry, go ahead, Greg.
I remembered one other thing beside a shameless plug for the Science Center. You need to come down and see that theater and see that space in action, because we've all been living on smaller devices. And there's something just that opens you up when you do that. So try and come down and see it. One of the regrets that I have, a small one, is that we made a big investment in what became one of our most popular exhibits ever. It was called The Garage, where you could do hands-on, play music and play instruments and jam with each other. And we've had to put that on hiatus. That is a little bit of a regret. Can't wait till the day we can bring that back. But as of now, we don't feel like we have a safe protocol for doing so that will make the public feel comfortable and let us feel good about it. So for now, the garage is closed.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. Your institutions and your fellow cultural institutions are such an important part of our city and everyone's lives. And we really appreciate you sharing with us and all of the work that you have done to make your everything that you offer accessible and available to us. So I'm going to turn it over to Marianne. Kirsten, science rocks. Greg, long live rock. Marianne, turn to you to close us out.
Thanks, Bob. And thanks, Kirsten. Thank you, Greg, for, just teaching us how to be innovative and to be successful and embrace the moment. And Greg, I know that you were juggling some significant commitments to be with us today, so thank you for making that extra effort. It's appreciated.